This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
What I'll do today is to give you two messages. One, a global perspective on forests and climate change, and another, a very specific based on practice in the Amazon. So that's how I've structured the talk, and very informal, so if there is anything that comes to your mind either during the talk or towards the end, please feel free to ask me. I just need to change this quickly, but it shouldn't take long. Okay. Some pictures of climate change. Tanzania, Mount Kilimanjaro, Glacier National Park in the US, Switzerland, and Peru, where part of the Amazon River starts. And this is drought in the Amazon, 2005. All what you see here in these different shades of green, light green, not all that is not dark green was the Amazon River, and this was all dried up. By the way, Lindin from Zurich was with us last week in the Amazon, and we have this drought now. It's a huge drought. From a scientific point of view, you cannot make a correlation between a specific climate event and climate change, but you can make a correlation between the frequency of extreme events. And apparently, what is happening is what is predicted by models of climate change, which is an increase in droughts, severe droughts in the Amazon. So this was in 2005, and this is now 2010. And between those, we also had very severe droughts. And this has huge impacts, both on ecosystems and on people's livelihoods. This is an ambulance. Most people that live by the Amazon River have no access to roads, so everything is done by boats. So if you don't have the river at that period of time, you don't have an ambulance, you don't have the school bus, so people don't go to school. And so there are all kinds of impacts. And most of those populations rely on fish as their main source of protein. So a lot of fish mortality associated with these droughts. So the picture is climate change is not something that is a theoretical discussion, but it seems to be happening right now and is having huge impacts, especially on two kinds of people: those who are most isolated and the poorest, that have the least resources to adapt and to respond to these changes. Now, this brings me back to your country. Any guess of what this is? Yeah. The accident in the Mexican Gulf. This is just to give a message of the need to change the way business as usual happens. The current development pathway is just not sustainable, and that means that we have to look for dramatic changes in consumption patterns, in energy use and energy generation. And right now this is a big discussion in Brazil, because Brazil just discovered a huge reservoir of oil deep in the ocean. And the images of this disaster has resulted in a big discussion in Brazil as of how to deal with that risk. And this has a connection with financial services and risk mitigation. This is the world in terms of energy. It's the world map distorted according to the consumption. So you can see most consumption here in North America, Europe, and in China, and India, and Japan. Very little in Africa, very little, relatively speaking, in Latin America. If we look at deforestation, the map is basically the opposite. Most deforestation happens here and in Africa and in Southeast Asia. So one of the challenges that we have is to change the current pattern of energy use, moving away from fossil fuels and going more towards renewable energy. And another challenge is to stop deforestation from happening at the current speed. I like to look at the role of forests, comparing that to the role of heart, because life is comprised of water. Our body is 70% water. The earth is the same. And this is water vapor movement around the globe. This is hour by hour, day by day, month by month, by NOAA. And this is the Amazon, and we're sort of here in North America. And there's very interesting new science coming up showing the role of forests as large pumps that, as a result of difference in pressures, help this process continue. I'm not going to get into the details of this, but the message is that the whole process of circulation of water vapor is highly influenced by presence of forests. So forests here, which are the largest forests in the world, and also in Africa and in Asia, provide an important environmental service. And water and carbon are those that are most easily related to. Biodiversity has an intrinsic problem of having not a currency that one can use to make calculations. You cannot add 2 butterflies and subtract a frog and combine with a monkey, so it doesn't add up. Whereas in climate science, you can convert everything into CO2 equivalent. And with water also, you can make connections between gallons of water and productivity of crops and so on. So I think that's a very important service that rainforests have to all of us, since water is so critical. For the case of Brazil, we're a big agricultural producer, and humidity for southern Brazil comes through the Amazon. So not only agricultural production, but also electricity generation, and also urban water consumption is dependent on rain and rivers that fuel those. This is projections done by McKinsey on the scenario for 2030. If we're going to maintain the 2 degrees limit for 50 ppm, we have to depart from business as usual. These are emissions, billions of tons. Gigatons is billions, so it's billions of tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So this is the current business as usual trajectory. Clearly not sustainable. Too much use of fossil fuels in this country, in China, and throughout the world. So we have to depart from this. So there are several studies. I think this is one of the most respected studies done by McKinsey. So we need to go this way. We need to level off soon and then start declining production. And there is a challenge here as it relates to all sectors. In terms of deforestation, there are different accountings, but it's between 12 and 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions that come from deforestation. It's more than the whole transport sector put together. If you add up cars, planes, and ships, deforestation accounts for more than that. This is the abatement curve of McKinsey. Here you have the relative cost, and here is the size in terms of the amount of emission reductions that each sector can point to. You probably can't read all of this, but the message is that there are some sectors, like changing lamps, that can pay back. It's economically viable. If you change a lamp to a more efficient lamp in a few months or a few years, you can pay that back. So this is the category of those alternatives that have a negative cost. And here are those that are very expensive, including CCS, carbon capture and storage, which is receiving a lot of investment. And is very expensive, in the order of $50 or $60 per ton. And in between here, there are a lot of opportunities for reduction of emissions associated with deforestation and sustainable land uses. And these are the ones that I'm going to get your attention to. Those alternatives to improve both livelihoods, reduce poverty, and increase the carbon content. The big numbers that we have in the discussion at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, is how to reach this reduction of 17 gigatons by 2020. This is the gap. We have to reduce those. If we take the scenario of IPCC, 1990 emissions reduced by 20%, we have 9 gigatons. If we go to 40%, we have 11. And there's still a gap that needs to be fulfilled by non-Annex 1 countries. And for those who are not very familiar with that, non-Annex 1 countries are those that are industrialized countries and have high historic rates of emissions. So there's still that gap, and the potential of Annex 1 countries is only 5. So even with those scenarios here, rather limited scenario, we still have a gap of 4 if we consider this potential here. So the question now becomes, how are we going to fill this gap? And the potential of REDD, and REDD stands for Reduction of Emission from Deforestation and Degradation, and there's a REDD Plus, which the plus includes management, conservation, and enhancement of carbon stocks. So REDD has a potential of about 5. So REDD could play a very important role in this big equation because it's big, because it's relatively inexpensive compared to other alternatives. So the numbers we're discussing, and this was an agenda that was hotly debated in Copenhagen, and now we're preparing for Cancun in Mexico, where another round of discussions are going to take place. That maybe part of that 5 gigatons could go as offsets to offset Annex 1 countries. And part of that could go to nationally appropriate mitigation activities. And this is a political decision. What's the proportion that will go to one or the other? And there are many interests, and there's a big dispute. I'd just like to make a connection between this and California. California has as you know better than I do, a very proactive and very pioneering initiative on climate change. So the offset of emissions for California, for example, could be the destiny, say, of some of these red carbon credits. I've argued for a couple of years that we should have a quota for red of 10% as a percentage of the emission reduction targets of Annex 1 countries or states like California, so that it doesn't flood the market, because that's a concern that many people have, by bringing in less expensive credit, you could flood the market. But by having a quota, you reduce that risk or you eliminate that risk. And also you don't provide an easy way out for polluters, so that people have to do their homework, so to speak, at home by reducing emissions. And also it can provide significant levels of funding. If you take the 2008 carbon market, which was about 118 billion, 10% of that is 11 billion. And all the estimates done by C4, by Stern Review, Elias report, all of those mostly recognized reports point to a need of investment of between 10 to 30 billion dollars a year to curb deforestation. So a mechanism like this could provide the level of scale of financing which is needed. And another point that I think is important in this big picture is the debate of whether we should have market-based finance or government-based finance. And my position has been that it has to be a combination of both. Government finance, such as what is coming from Norway, is important in improving governance. And market-based mechanisms, such as the carbon market, could be directed towards projects, and projects can result in more measurable activities that can generate credit. And these two could work together. So I think the combination of these two mechanisms are very interesting. And bringing back to the case of the US, USAID has just had a new increase in its budget for government-based support, and there could be opportunities in legislation such as in California, or eventually at the federal level if the legislation is passed in the US. Okay, so now I stop here, and this is sort of the big picture, and go into more of how to turn this whole complex issue into practice. And I'd just like to start by saying that I'm a solutionologist, and this is a cartoon that describes this, say, philosophical approach. This is Mafalda. It's an Argentinian character, and she's here looking at the globe, and she taps the globe and says, well, don't worry. In this very moment, there are thousands of people studying all your problems: overpopulation, hunger, pollution, racism, arms race, violence, everything. And she sort of looks happy, but then she turns back and says, yes, I know, there are more problemologists than solutionologists. And what can I do? I think that's part of the problem of the world. We have too many people explaining why something didn't work. What is the problem? What's the risk of this? Why this isn't going to work? And we have very few people trying out to make it happen. And I have a hypothesis for this, as I was sharing with the Dean. And my hypothesis is that it's more challenging to try to come up with solutions. It's more risky because it may not work. You might say, well, this is the solution. You write a paper and say, this is the solution. Okay, when you try to implement that solution, you may fail. So it is a riskier enterprise to try to implement those solutions on the ground. But given the urgency that we have to depart from that business as usual curve, we have to try out solutions. So my message to you is invest 90% of your time in coming up with solutions and trying to implement those, and just 10% on describing problems, because that's what the world needs, in my opinion. What's the problem of deforestation? I'll spend 2 slides in the problem. There are 2 types of deforestation, basically. One in the Amazon. Now I'm going to go to the Amazon. Large-scale deforestation associated with cattle farming and soybeans and other types of intensive agriculture. And then small-scale agriculture. This is an agricultural patch. In our case, it's 0.8 hectares per family per year, which is the average plot that people cultivate for about 2-3 years, and then they let the secondary forests regenerate. This is the Amazon in perspective to other tropical rainforests in the world. These are different boundaries of the term Amazon. This is the Amazon biome in yellow. This is the Amazon watershed, which are different. Some of this is savanna land. We have lots of savannas in central Brazil. We have savannas in Colombia and Venezuela. We have also rivers that don't drain towards the Amazon River, like the Orinoco. And we have several countries. So oftentimes people relate the Amazon to Brazil, but Brazil is only 60% of the Amazon. And within Brazil, there are different states, Mato Grosso, Rondônia, Amazonas, and so on. And one is Amazonas. So there are different geographical boundaries to Amazon in English. So it can be referring to either the basin, the biome, or the state of Amazonas, or the legal Amazon within Brazil. So there are 4 categories. And there are many different Amazonias. The reality that happens here, which is very similar, the landscape to Iowa, intensive farming, soybean, very productive, very wealthy, is completely different to here, where we have, in this part here, non-contacted indigenous groups as of today. So it's a very, very diverse landscape. So we cannot talk about a solution to such a diverse region. In terms of Brazil, it's about 50 to 75% of total greenhouse gas emissions of Brazil come from the Amazon. This is the state of Amazonas, the state of Amazonas in Brazil, in perspective. It's the largest state of Brazil. It's about 2.5 times the size of Texas. It's very large. Basically no roads, 98% forests, lots of indigenous peoples, about 20, as I mentioned, non-contacted as of yet. These are the protected areas of the state of Amazonas, and this is in 2005, and this was a scenario published in Nature a couple of years ago, and it's here is yellow in this deforestation, and this is 2012, and this is 2050. So red is preventing this yellow from happening in a very simplified picture. In 2003 in Amazonas, we started a new policy, and part of that is described in this short book, which I happen to have a few copies here for those who are interested, and I'm using this in my course here. And what I've attempted here was to make a summary of the experience of a university professor who left university, then went to office. I was in office for about 6 years, and so I tried to come up not with a textbook on what is sustainable development, but rather to non-conventional things like how to engage the press, how to link sustainable development ideas to jobs so that we can bring politicians on board, because this is the challenge. We have to, I think we have now a very good science background for sustainable development. We have very good understanding of the ecology of ecosystems, the dynamics and management. Of course, we have more to research, but we have significantly solid base. The challenge is to make that theory available, attractive, and bought by society. And that is the challenge. And in our case, we made a huge change because up to then, the state government used to distribute chainsaw for free as a way of helping out development, because the paradigm was based on the idea that forests are obstacles for development and agriculture is the way for development. And if that was the case, then let me help you out, give you a chainsaw so that you can develop better. So that was the mindset. And it was not unique of the Amazon. In a way, it's was the same history of this country in the Wild West, when the government policies encouraged encroachment and use of timber unsustainably. So it's the same story, different locations, different aspects, but same concept. And we insisted on a very simple message that no, that was not a good idea, because forests are worth more standing than cut. And we kept on saying this as if it was a mantra, no? With ads and with different involvement of the media, so that we could build in the Amazon society a vision that the forests were good, were not bad, and we should do the opposite. Rather than distributing chainsaws, we should have policies that increase the value of forests to those who live there. And the value is the value of those products, timber, nuts, oils, fiber, fruits. And we were successful in terms of deforestation rates. We had, we had 1,500 square kilometers per year, and it went down to 400. So about 70% reduction, according to the Brazilian Space Agency, which is very good in terms of monitoring satellite or forest cover with satellites. And the interesting thing is that not only deforestation went down here, but also the economy grew over this period, an average of 9% a year, sort of Chinese rates, which made the case of Amazonas something unique according to the United Nations Agency for Latin America. Protected areas, we were able to increase from 12 to 41, almost tripled the size. And the whole story goes around this message of making forests worth more standing than cut. And I like to use this picture to express, to see this man. He's a very bright man. You can see he's strong, he's honest. And he may use this axe to cut a tree, but not because he's stupid, not because he's ignorant or he's irrational. He's bright, clever, rational. He might make the use of this axe to cut a tree because the economic rationale is such that that's the smartest decision. So we have to see through his eyes, through his mindset, through his values, and see what are the things that are driving his behavior, and see how we can work with him or with her to come up with a strategy, a rationale that makes for them sense to conserve the forest. It's not going to be something done by policing. Oftentimes people make the mistake, say, oh, the problem is that we don't have enough police. But it's not enough police. That's not the issue. It's an issue largely dominated by economics and by household level economics. It has to make sense from an economic standpoint to these people who live there to conserve the forest. So the challenge is to create a rationale for this. And how to create this rationale, how to build these conversations, because people speak different language. It's not that they speak Portuguese, they speak a different language than Portuguese, in the sense of having different values, using different expressions, having different ways of life. So I like to say that São Paulo is almost the same thing as Los Angeles or London or Tokyo. All have traffic jams, have restaurants and movies, all the same, more or less. But they're very different from the Amazon. The difference between São Paulo and the Amazon is much greater than between São Paulo and New York. And so people who walk out of the university have to learn to speak a different language, to use different ways of talking. So for those of you who are students and are going to work in different parts of the world, it's very important not only to speak the language, Spanish, Portuguese, French, whatever, but to understand the way people live and understand the way people communicate, which is quite different. You may get an answer yes, but the person may be saying no. So we have developed a very strong and sophisticated technology for arts and education. So we use theater. There's a professional clown we have, who's excellent. We have a school of that. Most people are illiterate. So if we do a PowerPoint presentation, sort of like this, doesn't work. And people are bored, not only because they can't read, but they don't have the mindset like all of us have had. No, we've spent hours, thousands of hours sitting on a classroom, and they have not spent it, so they get bored in a few hours. So it has to be fun. So we use circus, theater, music, a lot of contests of writing music, and then that's how we start our work, how to engage them. And these are just pictures of some of the work we currently do. At the start of this program that we're now implementing ends with, or starts with a 2-day course. It's a crash course on IPCC and climate change. We start by asking them what's their perception of climate change. And what they're saying basically is that the sun is lower and warmer than it used to be. It's very tough to work at midday. And storms are becoming much more frequent and strong, like taking rooftops of houses, sinking boats more frequently. Some fruit trees are not fruiting at the time they used to be, so some wildlife are having trouble. So on the base of these perceptions, we bring the science of sort of what I've shown you here, the business as usual, that kind of story. And then they get a certificate on climate change. And then we ask them if they would like to make a commitment for zero deforestation. And then we say, well, if you make a commitment for zero deforestation, we will also make a commitment to invest in what we call the Bolsa Floresta program. It's called sort of a forest stipend program, which has 4 components as a stimulus for this commitment of zero deforestation of primary forests. And we invest about 160,000 reais, about $100,000 per year in each reserve, and we currently work in 15 areas. In income generation, anything that can be produced from forests that make money and are legal. So if they need a license, they have to have the license to fish or to produce timber, anything. It's very flexible, very open. The same, we invest in social programs, education, health, and communication. And here we're not substituting the government. We just encourage governments, local governments, to go to those places which are furthest away. Because there's a very perverse logic, economic logic. Mayors tend to invest more in urban areas than in rural areas for schools, for 2 reasons. One is because it's much more expensive to invest in very remote areas. The cost is very high, much higher. It's smaller population, the per capita cost is even higher. And then the payback in terms of votes is much smaller. So there is a very clear logic that it doesn't make sense to invest in those places. So people invest more in urban areas. So, and then it becomes a vicious circle because people tend to migrate more and more to urban areas. And then the problem becomes worse and worse and worse. 75% of the population in the Amazon is urban. About the same for the whole Latin America. So areas where we have lots of land are in a way empty. I'm sorry. Then this is the second component. The third component is association. We invest in empowerment. Local villages and local communities have a power deficit from a political standpoint because they're isolated, they're small, and they don't have the resources to go and talk to the mayor or to whoever is needed. So we invest in strengthening associations with a solar panel, internet connection, speedboat, and then money to pay for running expenses. So the president doesn't go bankrupt. It's very common for presidents of local associations throughout the world, in our case very much so, to go bankrupt because they are elected, receive a mandate, but they don't have the resources to do things. So they end up paying with their own money and they don't have much money, so they go bankrupt. Eventually lose even their wives at the end of the process. So it's not sustainable. The fourth component is the cash payment. There is a lot of distrust in many communities because governments have promised, universities, NGOs, churches, and so on. So people say, oh, this is not going to go anywhere, and investing in these things take a long time, so people don't trust, don't get engaged. And then we have this cash component, which makes a huge difference. It's a debit card payment for these environmental services that we call the Bolsa Floresta debit card. So each woman receives one of these, and then it can cash in any post office. And it's not meant to be the way out of poverty, because I think this is the way out. But this is something which is concrete and happens within 60 days, so people really trust what it is. It's a small amount, it's only $25, but for subsistence economies, it makes a huge difference. So these are the four components I mentioned to you. We started this program in 2007, and we now have about 7,000 families in an area of 10 million hectares, about twice the size of Costa Rica. So it's now the largest program of payment for environmental services in tropical areas. These are the areas I mentioned to you, 15 areas. This is the Juma project. I'm going to refer to this later on. This is the kind of investments. This is a boat for transportation of goods. This is a solar dryer for Brazil nut. This is a tractor to improve the efficiency of Brazil nut production in native forests. Boats, the card, and investment in education. I'd like to make a special point here that it's essential to invest in education if we want to change behavior. People oftentimes make mistakes, not because they have bad intentions or they are anti-environment. It's just they have never been taught about this. One thing that I'm very keen on doing now is education of mayors and city council members. It's very common to have these people with zero exposure to sustainability idea. And they are the ones who have the pen to make the decision. And this is a facility, is a concept that we've designed, a concept for education for Amazon individuals, both kids and adults. Here is a sort of a boarding school because people cannot commute every day. So this is the house of the students, the school, house of the teachers, and then the Center for Innovation, and this is a health post. So this is the scheme. The Center for Innovation is a place to receive students, researchers, and experts who have access to technologies that make sense. These are just some views of these places. They all have internet connection with wireless on these things, with malaria control. We use Skype for doctors in Manaus to provide medical assistance to people in the very middle of the forest. It's fantastic. I think the internet opens a wide range of opportunities for small businesses. We're having small business enterprise being supported by those centers for innovation. And also is a center to display different technologies like solar energy, agroforestry, planting to reduce fires, treatment of sewage, rainfall water collection, which has a huge impact in people's health. One of the components of what we're doing is very pioneer in terms of RED. Was the first project in the world to be certified with the RED credits done by TÜV Süd, which achieved a gold standard gold status, which is the highest status. And that reserve, this is a reserve, and it's a partnership with Marriott Hotels that has validated 3.6 million tons and has become a landmark in terms of the discussions on RED, because there was a lot of issues about, is RED viable or not? What about the methodology? What about the problems? A short mentioning on the institutional aspect, it's very important to design effective institutions. So the Amazonas Sustainable Foundation, I think, is a very interesting model for other institutions in the developing world because of efficiency, efficacy, and transparency. The fact that we have audit by Deloitte in account, or by Price, audit by Deloitte gives a lot of confidence to partnerships. So it's just a short message on the importance of having institutions that make sense. In closing, I'd like to say that RED is the most promising alternative, in my opinion, to implement conservation and sustainable development in the tropics. It's not free of problems, but I think if we have the attitude of sorting out the problems as they come, rather than trying to sort them all before starting the game. There's a saying in Brazil, which is the carriage, when it's going with lots of pumpkin, it looks like the pumpkins are going to fall, but as the carriage goes, the pumpkins accommodate and find a place. So that's a little bit of our theory. And to stress once again the importance of dealing with people. Reducing deforestation is not an agenda of plants and animals only. It's mostly a people-centered agenda. So we have to understand people and have to create hope and develop the talent and motivations of people who are in those regions that are very bright. And to close with a sense of urgency, this is a research I'm doing on some paintings on apocalypse, although I'm very optimistic. But this is in Georges Pompidou's center in Paris. Could be, it's Earth rising, something coming from the sky. This could be the front page of IPCC. And we're in a fight, a big fight. We like to think that in our case in Amazonas, we're in this position winning the battle, but it's a tough battle because this guy here is also tough. So the game is not over yet. So it's a big and tough fight. And we have to act quickly because on the other side of the fence, these guys are ready to come in. Thank you.
I was wondering if you could speak at all to the threat that fire has to compromising forest carbon stocks, and drawing on some of the parallels between the US and Brazil, the frontier expansion and the great fires of 1910 that happened in the Western United States precipitated major policy change. And I was curious about what the status is of firefighting and fire management in Brazil, given even though deforestation rates are declining, there's still massive pulses of fire activity.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
So why don't I take 5 questions? And there was someone else also from the back? Yeah. Oh, no?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I really appreciate your people-centered approach to this issue. I'm wondering to what extent this model can be adapted in other parts of the Amazon and other parts of the world.
Okay.
I've got one back here. I'm interested in what the timber companies, the big agricultural concerns, and other extractive industries, how they're reacting to this program. Because I know it's probably great to engage the local people. I know the big threat comes from the more entrenched and larger scale industries.
Okay.
Yes. What kind of tools does Amazonas have with regards to measuring change, either change in the carbon sequestration, change in the groundwater, the air, in the resources in that part of the world
Okay.
in real time.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about what kinds of strategies you think research scientists who study deforestation and forest response to climate change could best follow to disseminate data and information to a wide range of audiences at the multilateral, national, state, provincial, and local village levels to try to get out messages regarding the potential impacts of climate change on forests and the potential impacts of forest dieback on further climate change.
Okay. All right. So I start with the last and go towards the reverse order. What's the strategy for scientists? I think, first of all, keep it simple. The message has to be very, very simple. It cannot be very complicated. I remember once I was in graduate school in Harvard, and I took some courses at the business school, and there was a professor who said that I should be ready if I meet the president and in the elevator, and he was only going to the second floor, to the seventh floor, and I had only that period to convince him to say, oh, come on in. Let's talk a little bit more about what you've said. So you have to develop this skill of simplifying things and saying it in very, very clear way, which is sort of the opposite of what we learn in science. We like to give complicated explanations, and we reward those that are most complicated, that use lots of jargon, and nobody can understand what the person says. I said, that guy must be so brilliant, because nobody could understand the complexity of what he said, or she said. So I think it's sort of the opposite. We have to make it very simple. And their key audiences. I think teachers, school teachers, are very, very important, because they are bringing references and values to different people in the classroom. Mayors are very important. Businessmen are also very important. We're talking about the green economy, how to engage local businessmen and businesswomen in the green economy. And oftentimes, again, they don't do green things because they're anti-green. They may not have happened to come across opportunities for business related to the green economy. Politicians. There are politicians with bad intentions, but there are a lot of politicians with good intentions and just don't happen to have had exposure to that. So I think there's a lot of things that could be packed in simple ways for those audiences. In terms of measuring carbon sequestration, measuring change, Brazil has a very good monitoring system which is available on the internet called DETER. It is a monthly report on deforestation, monthly, every month. So it's almost on real time. We are particularly, in our case, we have, in addition to that, which is based on Landsat imagery, we're doing permanent plots on forest biomass dynamics, and that is a partnership with the National Research Institution of the Amazon, INPA. We're also doing a partnership with Google, which is going to come up in the next few months in the Google platform, so we'll be able to monitor these areas in the Google platform. So there's plenty of good monitoring, but of course, this can always be improved. In terms of timber companies, what's the reaction of the bad guys to this? It's a response to an equation of the cost of illegality and the cost of legality. What is happening is a change that the cost of illegality is increasing, because the likelihood of you being caught doing something illegal is increasing, and the fines are becoming greater and so on. And the challenge is to reduce the cost of legality. Oftentimes people are illegal not because they have a tendency to be dishonest, It's because becoming legal is so bureaucratic, so many different documents and paperwork that are required that people just don't get legal. So it's a big challenge there in reducing the cost of illegality. And this is particularly true for forest management, because there's a wrong paradigm in forestry throughout the world, that the more complicated the regulation, the better is the control, which is the opposite. We shouldn't have the simplest regulations so that people can adhere to those regulations. But they should look at the things which are really essential, not look at what's the name of your grandmother. No? That's irrelevant for forest management. So we should look at the things which are very necessary. And there is a big agenda for simplifying regulations without making them weak, just making them more accessible. And the reaction of the timber companies is twofold. On one hand, you have the bad guys who are having a harder time, and the other are the good guys who are becoming more rewarded, so to speak, because, for example, the price of timber, regular timber in the Amazon is about 400 reais per cubic meter if it's illegal. If it's legal, it's 1,200. So it's 3 times more. So that becomes an attractive thing. So people respond more to these economic signals than to their conviction. People who are doing illegal timbers, they can easily go into legal timber if it's attractive to them. So that's the kind of rationale, a pragmatic approach that I think is needed. If this can be adapted to other parts of the Amazon or other parts of the world, my answer is that it can be applicable to different parts of the Amazon and also different parts of the world, but not to all places. There are areas that are very intensive in farming, as I described, soybean country, which this approach doesn't make any sense. But we have received visitors from Indonesia. Recently, I had the Minister of Climate Change in Indonesia who came to visit us for 3 days. This was a couple of weeks ago. And his response after visiting and seeing what we're doing, he was saying, well, this makes a lot of sense for Indonesia, and that was him saying that. We also have had visitors from Mozambique, from Tanzania, from Uganda, and different parts of Latin America as well. And people are saying that it makes sense. So my response is that I think it does make sense to areas which have similar landscapes in terms of land use and also similar economics of those that we have in there. But I should also point out that this is not a panacea. This is not going to be, although it's the most promising thing that we have around, it's not going to be a panacea for all. There are many other things that have to happen so that this is successful. And finally, fire. Fire is the biggest threat, in my opinion, for the future of tropical forests. You in California know very well about fires because here burns every now and then. And these longer dry periods, which seem to become longer and longer, increase the risk of fires. And this year was very interesting in Brazil because deforestation was reduced, but fires increased. And we might see that as a trend because fires get out of control. And imagine if you have to combat fire in a place which has no roads, so it becomes tough, very, very tough. It's not an easy thing. So one of the requirements when people become a member of the Bolsa Floresta scheme is that they have to control fire in their agricultural lots. That means that they should not set fire when it's windy, when it's too dry, and without fire breaks around the shifting cultivation plots as a way. And actually we have a very interesting data which just came out of the satellites last month. The frequency of fire in the areas where we have the Bolsa Floresta is about 1/4 of what you find in areas which don't have the Bolsa Floresta in the federal government, about 1/3 of what it is in Indian reserves, and about 30% less than in other state reserves. So it seems to be working. And again, it's the people-centered approach. It's convincing people. It's not by a law. It's making them really understand that is eventually it's bad for them. It's not that it's good for us here. It's bad for them because if the forest is burned, then the abundance of wildlife on which they rely on is going to be harmed. So it's bad for them. So it's that kind of rationale that I think is most promising, linking conservation to people's livelihoods. And but I'd like to point out that you're right in making the emphasis on fire, and I think this is a big and a very important agenda. And thank you.